I've mentioned it before on the occasional video or in the YouTube comments every now and again, but there was a period in maybe the late 80s, or early 90s, something like that, where as a kid, I was a huge fan of pro wrestling. And in particular, at the time it was called the WWF, the World Wrestling Federation. Now it's, of course, the WWE. But during those times, as I say, during that period, and especially in the early 90s, I was hooked. I loved pro wrestling. And I haven't revisited pro wrestling. Due to certain circumstances, I couldn't keep up with all of the trends in the wrestling world, and so that meant that as I say, I couldn't keep up. But during that period, that core period in my life, I suppose, I was really into it. Just to give you some context, in case you're interested, the first WrestleMania that I remember really being emotionally invested in, shall we say, was WrestleMania 7. And my memories might be hazy, and I'm probably going to get a lot of my details wrong. So for those of you who are experts and historians in WWE, WWF history, please correct me. As I say, I'll do my very best. But I remember, so at the time I really got hooked. I started to get hooked in watching like WWF wrestling matches back in the day. So around that time, the Ultimate Warrior was already the WWF champion, and that was due, if I remember correctly, to the outcome of WrestleMania 6 and his match with Hulk Hogan. And so now he was the reigning World Wrestling Federation champion. And also around this time we had Macho King Randy Savage, but he was Macho. It was Macho Man Randy Savage, but at the time he became Macho King Randy Savage, and Sensational Sherry was with him, so she was Sensational Queen Sherry and Macho King Randy Savage, and that led to the rivalry that culminated in the match between Macho King and the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 7, right? And that was, I hope I got that right, the retirement match. So whoever lost that match would have to officially retire from wrestling. So that was around that time where I really got into, I became hooked. I first became really introduced to the world of pro wrestling, and it was fabulous. So it was also around this time, and those of you who might know, so who are the other wrestlers that were around at the time? So $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase was around at the time, and also there was Earthquake. Earthquake was around at the time. Hacksaw Jim Duggan was there, and he'd do this thing with the 2x4 and the ho, and Big Boss Man was there. I love Big Boss Man's intro, that theme song that he had. I thought that was such a cool song. Is it a hard time? And that was so cool. And let's see. Oh, and also there was, this was the time where, as I say, around this time, Bret the Hitman Hart wasn't doing a lot of singles matches. He was actually in the tag team, which was, what was it? It was the Hart Foundation? Is that right? He was teamed with Jim the Anvil Neidhart. Excuse me. So they were the Hart Foundation. So the first time I heard of Bret Hart was in this tag team formation. So that became my entryway into the legacy, if you will, of Bret Hart. But and this was before Owen Hart had made his debut in the WWF at the time. But let's see, who else was around? Oh, the Bushwhackers were around back then. This was before other tag teams like this was before, say, the Nasty Boys. Do you remember them? So they came a little bit later, but I was still a fan of wrestling when the Nasty Boys emerged on the scene. But at the time I was hooked. There was like Legion of Doom, remember them? And they had the great opening, what a rush. And in the TV show, which was called Wrestling Challenge. There was a WWF TV show called Wrestling Challenge, and that was like a weekly thing where you could watch all these matches, and you could watch the Superstars of Wrestling. That was another show, Superstars. I think that was a time where they had, right, Superstars or Superstars of Wrestling, and then Wrestling Challenge. And so Wrestling Challenge was great because it always had that little intro with, I think it was Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby the Brain Heenan. They come up from like the middle there, and they grow in size, and they give their little intro in front of like a blue screened arena, and then it would open up, like the WWF logo would open up, and you'd see all these the opening montage of all these finishing moves, like Hulk Hogan's leg drop and Jake the Snake Roberts DDT, and it wasn't the finishing move, but you also saw Mr. Perfect's like a drop kick or something. And every time there would be an impact, you'd hear on this, like the music, it would be like dun dun boom boom. They'd have like the sound of drums or something to imitate the impact of a punch or a kick or something. But anyway, that Wrestling Challenge, that brings back a lot of memories. I love that show. What was I saying? Oh yes, so it was around this time. So when I first got into WWE or the WWF, the Bushwhackers were there. There was the Orient Express with Mr. Fuji. They were there as well. The Rockers, I think, were there too. So that was Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. I think, yeah, they were there. And I mentioned Legion. Oh yeah, and it was there was also Jimmy Hart's. In Jimmy Hart's stable, it was what was the name? It was Greg the Hammer Valentine and the Honky Tonk Man, and they were the Rhythm and Blues. Yeah, Rhythm and Blues. And then so they were, and I loved the theme song or the intro. It wasn't the first theme that the Honky Tonk Man used, but I loved the second theme that he used. That was great. Come on baby, hold me tight, or something. Yeah, and that was great. I love that. And then also there was what was the name of that? Well, they had a great finishing move. It was you saw it at the beginning montage of, as I mentioned, the Wrestling Challenge opening. You'd have the Power and Glory, right? So it was at Power and Glory, and they had, what was Power? It was Hercules and Paul Roma. Right, and then so they would be like, was it one guy, Hercules, would do a I forget the name of the move, the back thing from the top rope, and then the other guy, Paul Roma, would do would jump off the top and then land on the guy, so it'd be like boom boom, right? That was Power and Glory's finishing move, right? I hope I got that right. So that was really cool. Those were great. Oh, and also, I was, by the time I got hooked into wrestling, this was before The Undertaker made his debut, and so I remember that. So that was the build-up to, what was it? I forget the year, but it was SummerSlam. Well, not SummerSlam. It was Survivor Series, excuse me. And it was Survivor Series, and it was the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase's team. And I remember the build-up was, it was him, what was it? It was him and... who was it? Was it Rhythm and Blues? And then it was the mystery member, and all the way up to Survivor Series, he, like $1 Million Man or Ted DiBiase, would just be building, we're gonna have a mystery member on our team, and so you better be careful because this guy's really tough. That sort of build up, and that was a great thing about wrestling back then. It was all the build up that you could see. They'd have the little corners. And then when Survivor Series happened, and that match came up, people were like, who's this mystery guest, or who's this mystery opponent? Who is this thing? And I remember, right, it was they got into the ring, and before the match started, and it was Survivor Series, so it was the 4-on-4 thing. And who was on the other side? It was like the Hart Foundation, Bret Hart and Jim the Anvil Neidhart and others, and then it was it Dusty Rhodes, I think, was there as well. And so but it was the 4-on-4 team. Yeah, it would have been Dusty Rhodes, because I think there was that at the time it was the rivalry between Dusty Rhodes and Ted DiBiase, Million Dollar Man. But anyway, it was at that occasion, right, where Million Dollar Man announced the mystery guest, and it was The Undertaker, and the first emergence of Undertaker, or Kane the Undertaker, I think, and it was Brother Love at the time. It wasn't Paul Bearer, it was Brother Love who brought him out. And they walked out slowly. It was amazing. It was like, oh wow, oh my goodness! And then and look at the size of that guy. And then of course the rest was wrestling history, and we saw what happened. And then later on, it was Brother Love who was managing the Undertaker. But then at some point, I remember it was maybe Wrestling Challenge or Superstars or one of those, or maybe I forget. Was Raw one day? Was Raw there at the time? I forget. But it was one of those shows where you had the corner, Brother Love's corner, his little skit, and then that would be the opportunity for Brother Love to say, I'm going to be handing the reins of the managerial responsibilities of the Undertaker over to the new guy. And it was Paul Bearer, and Paul Bearer came, and then suddenly it became Paul Bearer and the Undertaker from then on out. And that, of course, as I say, the rest was history. And I love that too, because my friends at the time, as I say, I was a kid growing up, but my friends at the time, they were also wrestling fans. We'd always like try to do the Paul Bearer voice, and they'd be like, "Oh my Undertaker!" Oh, wow, what a great combination. So Paul Bearer and the Undertaker. So. So that was great. And actually, I saw when I was a kid, my dad was so kind. He was able to get tickets to a live World Wrestling Federation event, and I want to say it was Madison Square Garden. So, but he got tickets, and so we were able to go and see the. We were able to see the Ultimate Warrior, or not the Undertaker. And so that was amazing. That was really amazing. And by that time, Paul Bearer was there, so it wasn't Brother Love by that time. And I also remember we were really high up in the seats, and so we could barely see anything. I couldn't see anything, and the people in the seats in front of us were I remember these adult men, and they were having a good time and watching it. And I remember my dad, he had this large drink. It was maybe a soft drink or a beer or something, I forget, but he had this drink, and he was getting into the matches too, and then suddenly he spilled his drink on the guy who was sitting in the seat in front of him. So, and the guy turned around, what are you doing? He was really angry. But my dad was, I'm so sorry. But I suppose we should be lucky, because the guy didn't demand that we pay for any kind of laundry or anything. So that was okay, I suppose. But anyway, I suppose it was soon forgotten, and those two gentlemen were back into getting into being excited about the wrestling. But yeah, my father spilled the drink on the guy's shirt in front of him. But anyway, that was great. So that was my one time where I was able to watch a wrestling match live, and it was The Undertaker, and Paul Bearer was there. So I forget who his opponent was, but my goodness, that was great. And oh my goodness, that was a fun time. And what else? This was also, I mentioned it before, but this was also after Macho King became, or returned to becoming Macho Man, and he officially retired. That was when Miss Elizabeth came back, and it was on one of those shows, Wrestling Challenge or Superstar, wherever, where he came and he proposed to Miss Elizabeth in the ring, and then she, he said that thing, and I loved it. He said, Elizabeth, "Will you marry me?" And then and it was Mean Gene Okerlund who's in the ring, and everyone's like, "Oh," and what's she gonna say? And the microphone was to Miss Elizabeth, and then she said, "Oh yeah," and that was great. And then the wedding itself was held. I want to say it was, what was it? It was it was SummerSlam. The event, the big event that would follow that was SummerSlam. I hope I got that right. And so it was SummerSlam, and that was where it was. What was it? A match made in heaven, a match made in hell, and it was. Right, the wedding, and then what was it SummerSlam? Was it that SummerSlam where we had the thing with Hulk Hogan and Sergeant Slaughter? I hope I got that right, but anyways, the match made in heaven, the match made in hell. So, and also it was at this time, speaking of SummerSlam and Survivor Series as well. So the big four WWF events, the pay-per-view events, were WrestleMania, and then SummerSlam, and then Survivor Series, which would fall around, I think it was around Thanksgiving, and then Royal Rumble. And also there was King of the Ring, but I think King of the Ring maybe re-emerged a little bit later. But when I was into wrestling at the time, it was those four. I remember the Royal Rumble. I love that concept of Royal Rumble. And I think my favorite Royal Rumble was it was the early 90s, and it was the one where it was like I forget the order, but people like it was Roddy Piper and also Ric Flair, and Ric Flair was he was like he wasn't the first one, but he was like one of the early entrants in the Royal Rumble. And he stayed throughout the entirety of the Royal Rumble from the start, so almost from the beginning to the very end. And along the way, I remember there was a moment in the middle of that Royal Rumble when all the other wrestlers were out, and it was just Ric Flair in the ring, and then they were just counting down, waiting for the next wrestler, who would be the next wrestler to arrive. And lo and behold, it was Roddy Piper, and he ran down towards the squared circle. He went in, and he's like, ah, and then he just went at it. Of course, at the end, he was eliminated before Ric Flair, who, as I say, ultimately won that Royal Rumble, which was amazing. That was amazing. And I remember, too, that was the one where you had other people. You had Hulk Hogan there, and I think his name was Sid Justice at the time, I think. And then that was meant to start the whole rivalry, I think, between Hulk Hogan and Sid Vicious or Sid Justice. But that was interesting, and British Bulldog was there. British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith was there as well. So that was speaking of this time and British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith. That reminds me that it was also around this time that you had one of my favorites was. Earthquake. You remember Earthquake? He was one of the, at the time I got hooked into wrestling, he was a heel. He was a bad guy, and so his gimmick, his move would be what was the name? It was the thing where he like his opponent would be laying down on the mat in the middle of the square circle, and then Earthquake would like jump around like boom, 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 boom to announce the impending final move of Earthquake, when he'd go run across, and then just boom, sit on the guy's chest, and that would be it. So that would be the finishing move of Earthquake. Amazing stuff. But this was also the time of Tugboat. You remember Tugboat? So Tugboat. It was. I seem to remember this too, because maybe it was around Survivor Series where it was like Hulk Hogan teamed up with Tugboat and Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Big Boss Man, I think. And I think maybe that was the same Survivor Series as the one I mentioned. I forget. But this was around the time that it was Tugboat. And then, of course, we found out later who was a face. And then Tugboat became a heel. And when he became a heel, he became Typhoon. And then that was a great occasion for Typhoon to team up with Earthquake, and they became the Natural Disasters. And I think it was Jimmy Hart. So they became the Natural Disasters. That was great. And of course, later on, we also know that outside of in other wrestling organizations, he later became what is it? The Shockmaster. So, which is another separate story, a separate legend itself. And I remember this too. Speaking of Davey Boy Smith, British Bulldog, I love the introduction of the Shockmaster. Because it wasn't just the impact of seeing the Shockmaster and hearing his voice and seeing what happened with the explosion in the fall, but it was also the build-up before the Shockmaster exploded through the wall, and it was like Sting and Sid Vicious was there, right? And also Davey Boy Smith, and Davey Boy Smith was like shouting, he's like, "I'm gonna let Sting introduce them." It wasn't, he was shouting not to announce the Shockmaster, but he was shouting to announce that Sting would be announcing who would eventually be the Shock. And I thought that was so funny. Oh my goodness, my goodness, so many memories. But so that was British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith. But back in the day, he was of course wrestling in the World Wrestling Federation. So, and I think he was there in the Royal Rumble. So, that was, and I should say, I mean, I could go on and on. There was also, I was a huge fan of other wrestlers like Mr. Perfect and Jake the Snake Roberts, and I mentioned him before, but $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase. All other wrestlers too that were there when I first really became a fan of wrestling was like people like do you remember like Texas Tornado? Or Tito Santana, Superfly Jimmy Snuka. Who else? Oh my goodness. They came a little bit later, but there were wrestlers like the Mountie. And there was one that I could, as a kid, it was really hard to wrap my head around the concept, but remember Erwin R. Shyster, IRS? I never really got that. I mean, I guess I understand it now with the idea of, right, income taxes, but or tax paying, or payment of taxes in the United States, but still. Erwin R. Shyster, wow, what a concept. And so that, very interesting stuff. And then later with things like Giant Gonzalez and the Warlord, and there was one. Do you remember one called? There was one called Skinner. There was a wrestler called Skinner, and I think he was like a crocodile hunter or something. I forget, but and Bam Bam Bigelow, and gosh, who else? Diesel, I think, came a little bit later. Razor Ramon came a little bit later. Yokozuna. Yokozuna, that was amazing to see Yokozuna's finishing move, right? He'd get up on, it wasn't the top level, but it was the second level, and he'd just get up and he'd just sit on the guy, just jump on the guy. Wow, talk about an impact. And that was also the thing, right? Yokozuna, and what was the one, right? WrestleMania 10? Was WrestleMania 10 the one in, was that in Las Vegas, I think? It was in like in the outside arena. And there was that whole thing with Yokozuna. Was that, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say that was where Yokozuna fought Bret Hart. I don't know, but as I say, please correct me and then Hulk Hogan came in. There was also the thing in the middle, the one that I really loved about that WrestleMania was the one, Doink the Clown, and the surprise at the end of that match. It was WrestleMania 10. What happened at the end with Doink the Clown and hit the trick that he had up his sleeve. It was remarkable. So so Yokozuna. That was also. Wow, I mean, wrestling was this great theater, and they put on this great show, and they really put their hearts and souls and bodies into it. And so, I mean, you hear these legends and people talking about wrestling now, and what do they call it? Like interviews or shoots? I think that's the phrase. But this is stuff that I think a lot of people around my age were really into it. At least my friends at the time were really into this, and so that was a really fun time. And even now, as I said, I haven't watched these matches in ages since they were broadcast, but I still, for whatever reason, they still are there in the memories. And so I think I hold a great fondness for them because of that. And they did come at a time, as I say, when I was a kid growing up, and it just became this fascinating thing. And maybe just a few other comments would be that the theme songs were things that I loved. I loved the theme songs for the wrestlers, and the ones in particular that I really loved were there was, of course, the I think it's pretty iconic, the Bret Hitman Hart theme song. At the time, as I say, that was the theme that was used for the tag team, the Hart Foundation. So Bret Hart and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. So, but it was like the dun 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 dun. So that was the very famous one. And I know that there are later versions, but I really liked that early version of that theme. So there's that, and there was. I mentioned Mr. Perfect. Mr. Perfect's theme song is like epic. That could be one of my favorite wrestling theme songs ever. You know, dun 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 dun. And then that would be the one where he'd enter the ring and he'd have his gum and he'd spit his gum in there and he'd flick it. And at the end, right, his finishing move was the perfect plex, right? And what would he say before he would do his finishing move? He'd go and he'd look out in the crowd and he'd shout in a loud voice, and now you're going to see a perfect plex. And he'd do his perfect plex, which was, now I think about it, it's quite physically demanding. At least it looks that way, because you have to arch your back and you have to turn, you have to hold the body weight, and you have to hold not just yourself, but also the body weight of the opponent. So very impressive on a technical level, Mr. Perfect. Incidentally, I should say that I looking back on it, I was really big fan of the technical wrestlers. So I guess in that group you would count like Bret the Hitman Hart. I think you count $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase in that group. Was it Survivor Series, the one where you had the Undertaker debut, where it ended up being, is that right? It ended up being Ted DiBiase and Bret Hart. And I remember thinking, wow, this is so cool. And $1 Million Man, he was a really effective heel. He was such a great bad guy, because he had that attitude that he showed, and it was part of the persona, of course, of $1 Million Man. But as a wrestler, I remember it was Bret Hart just doing all his tricks, right, his technical tricks, to try to basically pin Ted DiBiase. But DiBiase would always be able to kick out at the last minute. So 1, 2, and he'd just kick out. And then I think suddenly, I forget who was it. Ted DiBiase who was able to pin Bret Hart at the end of that Survivor Series match. Anyone who knows Survivor Series history, please correct me, because I'm as I say, my memories are too hazy to have a good grasp on the record, but the historical record. But I think that's what happened. But in any event, that matchup between Ted DiBiase and Bret Hart I thought was really cool. And it showed that Bret Hart was this technician of wrestling moves, but also that Ted DiBiase too. He was very clever in trying how he was able to maneuver himself in and out of various wrestling moves and situations. So, what a great! And speaking of Ted DiBiase, I was talking about theme songs. His theme song, I love the theme. Money, 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 right? Everyone's got a price. Everyone's got to pay. Because the $1 Million Man always gets his way. And what was his finishing move? It was the $1 Million Dream, right? Which was like what do you call it? I forget. It was the sleeper hold. It was like the reverse sleeper hold, except instead of using your own arms, you'd use the arm of the opponent to apply the sleeper hold, which, like, to this day, I think about, like, you can see pictures of, let's say, there's a really famous one where Ted DiBiase fought Jake the Snake Roberts. I want to say maybe it was it WrestleMania 6, I think? But anyway, it was there was this picture, and I remember this because I had this sticker notebook, or this sticker book of WWF superstars, and you could collect all these stickers. And if you collected all the stickers, you would assemble all of the wrestlers on the various pages. And one of the pictures I remember, I think it was in that book, you could see was the picture of Ted DiBiase, who applied the $1 Million Dream on Jake the Snake Roberts. And I just remember thinking when I saw that, this is so weird. It's like whose forearm is that he's using? And I remember it felt like a what do you call it, a sort of an illusion. What's quite, I don't quite know what's going on. That was fascinating, and so that was the $1 Million Dream, and what a great finishing move. So there was and the great theme song. So talk about great theme songs and finishing moves. So there was Mr. Perfect, as I mentioned before, and there was $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, Bret the Hitman Hart. Right, I think he became known for, what was it, the sharpshooter, and to win by submission. And of course, he had the great theme song that was, again, that was the Hart Foundation one, but then he used it when he fought in singles matches. And then Jake the Snake Roberts. So Jake the Snake Roberts, this was fascinating, right? Because Jake the Snake Roberts had that cool, sort of sinister, like that theme song, right? And of course, he had the thing with the snake. It was when I first got into it, the snake's name was Damien. And of course, later there was that rivalry that erupted between Jake the Snake Roberts and Earthquake. And there was that really traumatizing incident on one of those shows, Superstars or Wrestling Challenge or something, Raw, I forget. But there was a thing where I think we saw the bag, and Earthquake basically squashed the bag in the middle of the ring. I remember being so upset. I don't know if I cried, but I was close to tears if I didn't cry. I was certainly close to it, and I was really affected by that. And then later, Jake the Snake replaced the snake, and the new snake's name was Lucifer. So there were these sinister undertones that I didn't quite catch at the time. But of course, he was still, Jake the Snake, he was still, I think, a face. But then he became a really sinister turn, a heel, with that whole thing that happened with like Macho Man and Miss Elizabeth and all that rival. And then it became the thing where his theme song suddenly turned really creepy, and and before it had that little da 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 da, but then now it had the intro where it had that echo of his voice saying trust me, and that would be the way that he would be introduced during his heel phase, and that was really creepy, to be perfectly honest. But as a technical wrestler, I always was fascinated by Jake the Snake because he didn't he didn't have the muscular physique like, say, other wrestlers that were there at the time. Like, he didn't have the physique of, say, a Tugboat or Hulk Hogan, or like anyone like, say, the Big Boss Man, or even someone like Dusty Rhodes or something. He was very slender in comparison, but there was something about it, his movement, that was so fascinating. The way he'd do that reverse, I don't know what you call it, he'd hold onto the guy's arm and then twist it and then do the clothesline. And that would be one of the setup moves before he'd enter into the now. It's famous. It's probably, is it the most famous finishing move in wrestling? I'm not sure, but it's the DDT. Wow, the DDT, and I think it was so feared, and it was the thing where, oh no, he's got him in the DDT, and boom, and the opponent's out. So amazing stuff. So Jake the Snake Roberts, and his theme song and his finishing move, great. So there's Jake the Snake, there's $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, Mr. Perfect. I mentioned also the Ultimate Warrior, who was the WWF champion at the time. I think also at the time, I want to say it was Mr. Perfect who was Intercontinental Champion, but I could be wrong on that. But it was Ultimate Warrior who was champion. I must admit that I tried to be a fan of Ultimate Warrior. I really tried to get into the Ultimate Warrior, but now that I think about it, I don't think it worked out fully for me, because I think what it was I could never quite understand why the Ultimate Warrior was able to become so powerful. You know, there would be that point in the match with the Ultimate Warrior would he be like down, and the opponent would be pummeling the Ultimate Warrior, and the Ultimate Warrior would be close to losing the match. But then suddenly, out of nowhere, very inexplicably, the Ultimate Warrior would suddenly do the thing with his fists, and he'd be like, and he'd go like this, and he'd just start jogging and running around, and then the opponent would try to punch him, but it wouldn't phase the Ultimate Warrior, and he'd just get stronger and stronger, and suddenly he'd just get into this huge rush, I guess, of adrenaline, and then just go at it and then win the match. And so I would cheer on because he was a face, and he was one of the heroes and he was one of the faces of wrestling at the time. But I never quite understood that. I never quite understood how he could get his energy. Of course, it would be like from all the little warriors, and I never quite understood. But anyway, that was the era of the Ultimate Warrior. But for me, it would be the wrestlers like with the great finishing moves. I mentioned Power and Glory, I mentioned The Undertaker, of course, now the famous, what was it, the reverse pile driver called the Tombstone. Suddenly just turns the guy over and just smashes his head into the mat. It was some, wow. Okay, to see that for the first time, what an impact that had. And no wonder, as I say, the Undertaker became the huge legend that he is. And so, so there's the Undertaker's finishing move, and there's Mr. Perfect's finishing move, and then there was Ted DiBiase's $1 Million Dream. There was Sharpshooter by Bret Hart. There was the DDT by Jake the Snake Robertson, et cetera, et cetera. And then the theme songs, I mentioned Mr. Perfect's theme song I loved, $1 Million Man's theme song I loved. Bret Hart's theme song is iconic. There are also like Dusty Rhodes, right? American Dream. And then Big Boss Man's theme song I mentioned, Hacksaw Jim Duggan's theme song, and then there's so many others. Honky Tonk, or Rhythm and Blues, right? Honky Tonk Man's theme song I loved. And yeah, but it's probably for me, if I had to choose one, probably it's tough. It's tough to choose between $1 Million Man and Mr. Perfect. But if I had to choose one theme song for the ages, for me, it would probably be Mr. Perfect's theme song. You can play Mr. Perfect's theme song anywhere, and it becomes like an epic moment. It becomes a legend in your life. You could be just walking the dog and listen to Mr. Perfect's theme song on your headphones and be like, yeah, or you could just be cleaning the room and if you listen to Mr. Perfect's theme song and be like, yeah, I'm cleaning my room. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it just gets you in that zone. Oh my goodness, so many members. I didn't even talk about the merchandise. I remember also there were those, were there, am I remembering correctly? There was those like pillows that were in the shape of the wrestlers, and so the whole thing, you could like fight them, and there were also those figures. I remember I had one of the figures. I think I had one of the Bushwhackers. I think with the, there was the figures with their arms that were really large, and they were bent like this. But those are really popular among my friends at the time. So you couldn't get all. I remember my friend got, well, maybe the Hulk Hogan one or something. I was so jealous because everyone wanted the Hulk Hogan, but you couldn't find it in the store. It'd always be sold out. Later too, there was the Game Boy, and I remember there was like the WrestleMania game for Game Boy, and I was really into it. It was a WWF game for Game Boy, but there was that. There was also when I was a little bit younger, there was a thing about like WWF, and there was this telephone service where you could call and you press a button and you'd hear like you'd be like playing a wrestling match, and by pressing a button on the phone, you could order a particular wrestling move, like a forearm smash or something like that. And I remember I was really into this telephone thing, but then that month or something, when my mother got the telephone bill, she was very angry at me, and she said, you're doing this too much, and I was no longer permitted to use that telephone wrestling game because it cost a lot of money. So. But there was that, and oh gosh, what else? What else? There were so many other things during this time with wrestling, but and I know I got a lot of my details mixed up, but those are certainly the days. Those were the days indeed.